Alrighty, what's going on, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Time Out with Doc and Caveman. As always, you're here with Dr. Fantasy and my co-host, the Fantasy Caveman. Before we continue rolling on with our NBA team previews, make sure you subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts to get lots of great NBA content in the off season and throughout the season. So let's keep rolling here with our team previews. We are at the Minnesota Timberwolves now. So their 2020 season, they finished 23 and 49 overall, 7 and 24 under Ryan Saunders, and then 16 and 25 under Chris Finch, which was good for 13th in the Western Conference. They were the second worst defensive team in the league. Shocking, I know, and then the 17th most points per game. So pretty much right in the middle offensively. One thing that I think is kind of interesting is people were really optimistic with what Chris Finch did at the end of the season. And don't get me wrong, they played better, but I think it's been a little overplayed. They had a 39% winning percentage under him. And do you know where they would have finished on the season? It would have been 13th still. So even with that winning percentage, if you prolonged it and extended it through, extrapolated it to the entire season, they
Ooh,
still finished in the
Jordan's
same
using the
spot.
big words today.
I'm using my college words today. Yep. So that's what I paid a bunch of money just to use that word in a podcast. So I'm glad that I could put it to good use. All right, let's go through some of their season leaders. Karl-Anthony Towns, 24.8 points. Malik Beasley was actually second with 19.6. We had Anthony Edwards, who made the all rookie team and finished second in rookie of the year voting with 19.3 points. Then D'Angelo Russell with 19 points. So if you're keeping track, that's four guys 19 points or above, which is pretty impressive. Then rebounds, Karl-Anthony Towns at 10.6, Jarrett Vanderbilt at 5.8. Assists, Ricky Rubio, who is no longer there, with 6.4, and then D'Angelo Russell with 5.8. Steals, Ricky Rubio 1.4, and then D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards were tied at 1.1. And then rounding it out with blocks, Naz Reid and Karl-Anthony Towns with 1.1, and then Jaden McDaniels with one block per game. So, Caveman, who stood out to you with the Minnesota Timberwolves last season?
I mean, usually I look at this team like, okay, their star duo, to quote, in Towns and Russell, they didn't really do anything for me to really feel like, okay, they impressed. So I'm not gonna. So that's out. I mean, for me and I'm gonna let you take. I'm gonna let you take the guy I know you're gonna say. Uh, we know who impressed you, so I'm not gonna take that
Do
from
you?
you. But I'm gonna go with Malik Beasley. I think, cause remember they gave Malik Beasley an extension after a very small sample size.
They did. Yeah.
So it was like, okay, they must see something in him. And he didn't disappoint. He kind of, in his first season, that new contract, kind of, did his thing and kind of lived up to his potential on why he deserved that contract from both ends of the floor. So I think I'm excited to see him grow along with this core. So yeah, I would say Malik Beasley is the guy for me. I think for me with their star duo at uh Towns and Russell, it's kind of like status quo for them. They kind of just not they didn't digress. They just kind of stayed the same pretty much.
Mm-hmm.
So
Yeah, and I think it's interesting that they gave Malik Beasley a very large contract, by the
mm-hmm.
way. It wasn't just like, oh, he got a few bucks. I mean, he's making almost 20 million per season. So to me, that probably signals that D'Angelo Russell, if he's not out during the season, he's going to be out very soon. And honestly, I don't necessarily blame them for that. I will say that concerns me a little bit because who is their ball handler moving forward? I don't know because Anthony Edwards and Malik Beasley are better off of the ball. So I don't love. I mean, you could have Edwards and Beasley play the 2 and 3, but then that leaves a huge hole at the primary ball handling position. So, or at the point guards, Patrick Beverly, yeah, who they just acquired today as we record this, could be there's the answer. What was I thinking? Release
Yeah.
D'Angelo Russell, yeah, Patrick Beverly now. But so Anthony Edwards obviously impressed. The one, and I mentioned him during lives a few times as well. We knew he was going to be a great scorer. There's no doubt about that. His defensive effort is still embarrassing. I was actually watching kind of not highlight, almost a bloopers clip of him defensively last year. Highly entertaining, very sad at the same time though, because this is an athletic guy that should be able to play at least league average defense, and he just legitimately stands there and just watches the ball, and you're like, what is he doing? Like
How
he's
is he
really.
over a steal a game then?
I mean, that's just once a game. He's like, hey, I'm going to get in this passing lane and take the ball. I mean, that's all it takes is one play a game to do that. So he was actually one of the league's worst defenders last year. He was really embarrassing defensively. But the one thing I'm really surprised with is that he did not turn over the ball a lot. And we talked about that with his prospect profile last year, is there's a lot of offensive pressure on him at Georgia, which I think was part of the reason he turned over the ball and made some poor shot selection decisions. But he really improved very quickly as a rookie in that. And I was very impressed. He only averaged, what was it, 2.2 turnovers, which honestly is not really bad at all. I mean, that's really good if we're being honest about it for a guy that does have the ball in his hand. He's not their primary ball handler, but he has the ball in his hands a lot. So I thought that was really impressive and really encouraging. And to me, he has maybe even more offensive upside than we gave him credit for. I mean, this could be one of the top few scorers in the entire league. I mean, the guy's still 20 years old. The other guy I want to bring up who didn't get a lot of hype, but it was Jaden McDaniels. He was really good defensively. There was a point, a 20-game stretch where he had a top 15 defensive rating last year. He offered a lot of defensive versatility for him because he's long, athletic, could guard almost any position for them. And, that was a guy who coming into the draft last year, we said, okay, that guy, a lot of people thought he was going to be a superstar. And then he really underwhelmed during his college time. So he showed that defensively, at least, he can be a very, I don't want to say elite, but definitely an above average defender in this league. So I thought that was promising. He did almost nothing offensively. So when you look at his box score, you say, how was he impressive? But he did things that don't show up on the box score. And I thought that was at least encouraging because this team needs defenders, if we're being honest about it. So I think he at least gives them that moving forward. So
Yeah.
their offseason has been very quiet thus far. Addition wise, they added Pat Beverly today and through via trade. And I say today as in when we're recording this because it'll be probably about 5 days out from when it actually gets posted. But they traded for Pat Beverly and got rid of Juan Hernan Gomez and Jarrett Culver in exchange, which I actually think it's a pretty solid deal for them. And then they also added Taurean Prince and then lost Ricky Rubio, who we mentioned in the last episode. So let's go over what their current depth chart looks like. In the backcourt right now, they have D'Angelo Russell and Anthony Edwards listed as starters, with Malik Beasley, Jalen Noel, and Jordan McLaughlin coming off the bench. Then at the three, they have Josh Okogie and Jake Layman coming off the bench right now. And then at the four, Jaden McDaniels, as I mentioned, starting. Jarrett Vanderbilt behind him. Taurean Prince behind him. And then at the five, you have Karl-Anthony Towns and Naz Reid. So interesting roster here. What do you think as a whole, Caveman?
I mean, yeah, you mentioned it when you talked about the if D'Angelo Russell is going to be there long term, which obviously a lot of people around the league don't think he's going to be there too much longer. That backcourt depth is really tested once. Like you can okay, maybe D'Angelo Russell doesn't work well with the rest of the guys in the starting lineup, you could say. But then again, if he leaves, what do? You don't have a backup plan in place on that roster. You really don't. Patrick Beverly, that's not Patrick Beverly's game. I don't even think Beverly short term is a fix. that's not his game. That's not really his game at all. So that's, I mean, aside from that, I mean, it's still aside from that. There's some decent depth. Not the deepest team, but definitely some decent depth. You talk about Naz Reid, who I think is a solid backup guy. Vanderbilt's another solid backup front court player. Torian Prince, who's still around, he can provide some good depth. Gail Noel, if Josh Okogie, who I think's probably gonna. I think Josh Okogie should probably be off the bench, probably their six man. You got Russell, Beasley, Edwards, McDaniels, Towns, the starting line. Kobe on the bench. So he's a great depth piece. I like what I saw from him too. I didn't mention earlier. So they have decent depth, but that all changes if they move on from D'Angelo Russell. Then what do you do? It's kind of like puts them in a state of flux, because really then you can't ask Malik Beasley or Anthony Edwards to be your primary ball handler. That's not going to work.
Mm-hmm.
So that's kind of my overall theme, is that while the depth is okay, if they decide to move on from D'Angelo Russell, what do they do with it?
Yeah, and I mean, when you look at this roster, this is a roster that should be a playoff team. I mean, they have 3 all-star players, and I mean, there's not really debating it. Karl-Anthony Towns has been an all-star. D'Angelo Russell's been an all-star. Anthony Edwards will be an all-star multiple times in his career. It's just a matter of whether or not they can be better defensively, honestly. And the Western Conference as a whole, and really the NBA as a whole, if we're being honest about it, is just so strong right now, where if you're not good defensively, it's just going to be really challenging to compete with all these top dogs. So, one, I will say I love the move for Patrick Beverley, who I guess we didn't mention because he just got acquired today, but he's going to be coming off the bench for him. He adds a very tough defensive mindset. Jalen Noel, who wasn't even necessarily slated to make this team 100%, has been really good in the summer league. I watched him. Yeah, he will now. He's going to be not only make the team, but he'll be a pretty valuable piece off the bench, in my opinion. He has been tenacious defensively, and then he scored 26 points the other night, and he looks like he's really improved on the offensive end. I think it's going to be interesting to watch how he develops this season. Not that I think he's going to be their starting star point guard of the future, but I think he can be a really valuable, tough-minded defender coming off the bench for him in the future. So I'm kind of excited to see how he develops. And, it's one of the things that is kind of cool about Summer League. He was a second-round pick 3 years ago. Wasn't necessarily expected to do much, but he's kind of carved out a name for himself during actually the last 2 summer leagues. He played 40 games for him last year, so it's not like he wasn't on the team and not playing, but he's carved out more of a role because of this opportunity to showcase himself. So I think that's interesting. But when I look at this roster, I ask myself, when you have 3-star players, you have a little bit of even secondary scores and Malik Beasley. They have some defenders with McDaniels and Beverly now. I ask myself, why won't this team make the playoffs? And honestly, I don't have a good reason. When you look, I think it's just the depth of the Western Conference. But the reality is, if this team doesn't click defensively, they're just going to be at the bottom of the standings again. And I think the biggest thing that you need to look, that's one of the things I wasn't impressed with Chris Finch, is I would argue Anthony Edwards defensively was worse when they made the coaching change. And that concerns me. They need to bring in somebody. I mean, it's possible. I mean, it was comical. I'm telling you. Well, look up Anthony Edwards defensive bloopers last year. It's hysterical. It's hard to find. It was a smaller video that I just found scrolling through Facebook, but it's actually very hysterical. But I think they need almost. apparently we hated Tom Thibodeau a while ago, but apparently now he's the greatest coach ever. But they do need and it's ironic because he was there, but they need a guy. I'm not saying Tom Thibodeau because that didn't work, but a guy with that kind of background and that kind of mindset to come in here and say, hey, you guys need to play defense or you're never going to win. I mean, that's kind of the reality with this team is Anthony Edwards and Karl-Anthony Towns have the potential to be the best offensive young duo in the entire NBA. But you could also argue it's the worst defensive pairing in the entire NBA in terms of two star players.
Can't play no defense.
So when you look at that, you're saying, I mean, that's all they need. They need to put that effort in defensively, and this is an easy playoff team if they do that. But honestly, I'm not confident that's going to happen. I think that's what it comes down to is this team lacks defensive effort, and that comes from the top up, really. And I mean, I'm not saying Chris Finch did a terrible job because they had a better winning percentage than with Ryan Saunders, who got absolutely no buy-in, but they need a guy to whip these guys in the shape because they're not making the playoffs until they learn how to defend. And if they can, I'm not going to sit here and predict, and we can't predict that. I can't sit here and say, I believe Anthony Edwards will give more effort next season. And anyone who tells you that is lying. You're just throwing out a random guess. But that's the reality when you look at this team. If they give defensive effort, and they're even a league average defensive team. They don't need to be great. If they're a league average defensive team, this team will make the playoffs.
Yep, 100%. But you state this a lot when you talk about prospect profiles. It's hard to teach guys effort.
I agree.
It's very whenever somebody has questionable work ethic, especially on the defensive end, there's Jordan saying,
I jump all over them.
You jump all over them. It's so hard to teach effort on the defensive end. Which, to your credit, you were very skeptical about Anthony Edwards coming in because of that, and I don't think he did anything to alleviate your concern on the defensive end. The fact that there is a blooper reel about your defensive miscues, that's not good.
As a rookie, by the way.
He's
only played once.
So yeah, that's gonna be something we saw it with Tom Thibodeau. What he do? It's possible. It definitely is something that's in the realm of possibility. But they're, like you said, they're gonna need a Tom Thibodeau. I like offense, but you have to at least have just be like 20th in the league. You don't have to be average. Just be like 20th in the league defensively, and you can win it, and you can do.
You're really setting the bar low.
I mean, that's the reality. You don't even have to be league average. Just be like 20th, and the team has enough offensive potential to be a fringe playoff team if they're even slightly below average. But the fact that and we're not even gonna. I mean, and we didn't bring up. I'm not even gonna bring up the fact that they need their 3-point shooting because it wasn't good either. But they had
the worst percentage in the league last year.
But which was crazy because they took a lot of them.
Mm-hmm.
They took a lot of threes. They just weren't hitting them. But they still have guys that can score the ball, so I'm not incredibly concerned with that. Because I think you can taking smarter shots is a lot easier to correct than defensive effort. So that's gonna make me skeptical going forward. I mean, the reality is, if I think of where they're gonna finish, to me, until they show more defensive effort, they're the second worst team in the Western Conference behind Oklahoma City. And honestly, it would not shock me one bit if Oklahoma City finishes above them. That's how pessimistic, and that is so frustrating because they have a superstar in Karl-Anthony, borderline superstar in Karl-Anthony Towns, a star in D'Angelo Russell, a definite star potential, possibly superstar in Anthony Edwards, and you are the worst team in the Western. You're in the conversation.
It's embarrassing.
That's sad. But the reality is, until the defensive effort is corrected, they're going to be a bottom 2 team in the Western Conference. And that's sad to say
Yeah,
that.
no, it's embarrassing, honestly, for the entire organization, if we're being honest about it. And I'm not confident that Pat Beverly and Jaden McDaniels alone can make this team better defensively, because they're both good.
Malik Beasley's a solid defender.
He's like league average. I mean,
Yeah,
if he
that's all they need is a bunch of Malik Beasley level defenders.
I guess. Yeah, and you're right. We didn't mention the 3-point shooting, but they were one of the worst 3-point shooting teams. I believe, I don't have the number in front of me. I believe they had the worst percentage from the 3-point line last season. I know them and the Spurs
I don't have the exact stats, but I know they were like in the top 10 in 3-pointers attempted, but they were like in the bottom, and they were among the bottom in percentage. So that's why I didn't really mention it too much in the beginning, because that's something that can be corrected. So that I'm not really concerned with, but yeah, we're really gonna have to see this defensive effort prove. Otherwise, you're pretty much you're wasting the prime years of Karl-Anthony Towns. You're really stunting the growth of Anthony Edwards. And the important thing, even if you don't believe D'Angelo Russell is your long-term answer at point guard, you're really kind of devaluing him as a potential trade chip as well.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where we're at. Like even if you don't believe D'Angelo Russell is a long-term answer at point guard, you gotta do what you can to increase his trade value.
Mm-hmm.
So that plays into it too. So.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree, because, I mean, if this team isn't competitive mid-season, they need to dump him for as much as they can get. I mean, if we're being honest about it. So, yeah, I mean, if that team as a whole isn't gelling and D'Angelo Russell isn't playing well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point, that he's not going to be worth as much. So I think that's it. That was a really optimistic episode. So I think that was fun. But that's the Minnesota Timberwolves. Make sure you guys subscribe on YouTube and wherever you listen to podcasts. We'll be back with more episodes next week. So make sure you guys tune in, and we'll see you then.
Yep. Peace out.